Welcome back, everybody. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And today, Tony and I are back. Tony and I have been riffing on some things in the past, and I think we're going to do this more than once. Tony, I always struggle with this, though. How should I describe you now to the audience? Tony's role is?
I struggle with this, Roy, right now.
Nature of a modern career.
I am in a content creation space. So I think right now the best way to describe me is content creator.
He is a creator. The legendary creator economy, of which I've heard. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Roy, a startup investor in the future of work. We do one question a day, and today is a doozy because we were talking about this before, neither of us has a good answer to this one. And we've both probably been on the giving and receiving end. So the question is, my boss is always overpromising things to our customers. What should I do about that? How can I stop this horrible behavior?
It's a terrible behavior. And I think you're right, Roy. It's one that's stuck in my head. And isn't it? It's one of those when you learn a lot from incredible bosses, but you learn a lot from terrible bosses too. And you look at that and go, I think it's with your parents also. You go, I'll never want to be like you. And sometimes they're like, just you wait and see. And I think it's the same has happened. And that is the one thing that I took away from a couple of bosses I've had is, oh, well, let me please never be that person because I see the effect it has on the team and it is damaging. But it always creeps up, and it seems to creep up in moments of anxiety or in moments of panic. And I think it's normal. And I think there's like a balance, what you were talking about previously, of when do you do it, when do you not do it, and when is it good and when is it really bad?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think contributes to it, and then we can talk about what to do about it, is we love heroes. And so if the boss overpromises and some miracle happens and, somebody stays up late, getting the thing done and cranks on it, and then you push it out and you're so proud of it and blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden that person is a hero, which makes everybody want to repeat the cycle. And so you can be sort of addicted to the trauma hero cycle. And that's not a healthy thing for organizations. And, we were talking earlier, one of the things I find about this is there are lots of things you can do as a one-off, and how you define a one-off really depends. Like if somebody needs to stay up all night to finish something, it might be the right answer once in an emergency situation. Or sometimes there are periods of time that are kind of emergency situations. Like I went to work in New York City government after 9/11, and for 2 years, people were just cranking 24/7 because it was an emergency period. But then you have these folks who just kind of chronically do it in normal situations. And so what do you do about that?
It's interesting. I read, and I don't know why there's a parallel there, but I read something about someone who helps parents work with their kids better. And he was saying the best thing you can do with behavior is do not congratulate your child on the outcome, but congratulate them on the effort. Yeah. And I think there's a really interesting parallel there with what you just said, Roy, and it's a weird one, but I do think there's a parallel of, as long as you're not congratulating the team of you got it done no matter what at all costs, but you're congratulating, you put it all out there and you gave it, you're congratulating the effort versus the outcome.
I mean, it's growth mindset.
You congratulate the outcome, you get addicted to that. And I've seen that, that hero thing that you tie onto, it's also dangerous because it never becomes a team effort. It becomes a one-man show or one-woman show.
I mean, like so many things, I think there's an escalation pattern that you can practice this. And I'll say, fully admit, I am the boss who sometimes promises too much, maybe even often promises too much. Sometimes I do it as a motivational technique. You think it's too much, but I think it's not. We disagree. Go for it and watch it happen. And you learn systems for how to get better.
Would you do that in front of the client or the customer? Would you do that behind closed doors with the team and pushing the team? Because I think there's a difference there as well.
You always want to be in a position of being able to over deliver for the customer, but the power of a commitment in front of others is so much more. So I think the answer is both. I will sometimes overpromise, but it's a question of over relative to what? Relative to what's easy or normal for the team to do, relative to what's possible for the team to do. I mean, we have business leaders who constantly overpromise and then use it as a mechanism, as a kind of force of gravity. The problem is you can become the boy who cried wolf, or the person who cried wolf. You do it too often and it loses its power. And so let's assume you're in this position of the boss who is chronically overpromising. You're running ragged, Like, one of my thoughts is you just start with a little bit of the escalation, which is the little bit of the escalation is just asking the boss, how do you think we're going to do that? And it depends on, again, who the boss is and how, but, or making obvious the trade-off. We can do that, but you also promised client X that we would deliver this thing then. I don't think we can do both. If we have to choose, how are we going to choose? Now, some boss is just going to say, your choice is not to choose, go for it. And you end up then in a power struggle. But you also had this interesting idea that you were talking about around how to involve the boss in the delivery as a mechanism for making them aware.
Based on what you just said, it was a tactic that I still do, and I was grateful someone taught me, was when you have that moment of you feel I'm being stretched a bit too thin, I think we're overpromising to the client or to the customer, is going back to the boss and just saying, okay, what are we deprioritizing? And I think that's a very logical thing to say. I have 6 things on the agenda. You've just promised something with a deadline. What are we deprioritizing? And I think that's a good dialogue. But I do think there's another piece to that, which I have noticed, is I would not bring in the boss. So I would say to people, don't bring me into the conversation if you are not comfortable with me having all of the information, all of the data. Because if I don't have that, then I will probably end up in that position, what you just said, of overpromising, because I want to create that relationship going. You've brought me into the call to bridge those gaps, or it's maybe to make the client feel heard or seen, which that might have not been happening. And so you always go into that territory. But I think there's something there of understanding the process, understanding the tool, understanding the data, and understanding what it's going to take for the team to deliver. And I think the more you have that visibility, the less likely you are going to fall into that.
And I see John Fisher commenting on LinkedIn that this is a problem not just in business, but in academic research teams too. And I think that's, it's fascinating to see that culture pervade plenty of other places. So thank you, John, for sharing that. And I just say, you continue in the escalation, eventually you got to do things like quit. That's like the far end of the escalation, or, feedback to your boss's boss is another thing that you can do that's pretty high up on the escalation chain. But the right mental model to me is start with actions that are contained and respectful and would be easy if the person wanted to change behavior, and then escalate with the severity of the problem. And as you point out, sometimes it's diagnosing the root cause is actually not what the boss said, but what information you gave them beforehand. And so like so many things in I won't call it business because of John's point, but organizational life, you need a mental model for what's happening and why. And if folks know the 5 whys process, you can sometimes diagnose these things and realize, like, oh, I thought it was about Roy is just too aggressive in his timetable. Actually, it's about he's underinformed or something like that.
And it's interesting you bring that up with the whys, because I realize this is something that I have and I do a lot, which is when I hear something, I think of the final product or the final delivery, when actually, oh no, maybe it's just a draft that you need. And that's totally doable. Instead of going, I can't deliver this by tomorrow. Right. And then you realize, well, actually we're talking about 2 different things.
Stroke negotiation is another thing that you can do. Yeah, I love that. Or sometimes my team will say, how could we possibly do that? I'm like, we can fake these 3 things because they don't matter at this stage. We don't need to have them right. We can just hand wave about them, better word than fake. But here's the part that we really have to nail, and we have to keep them out, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, lots of ways to cut this apple. That's not an expression. It's an expression.
I'll take it.
Anyway, and that is today's This Is Not Advice. We already have a few more times, I think, coming up, Tony, that we're going to keep doing this. And so it's great to have you back. And for those who are with us for the first time, the reason we say it's not advice is because in this case, we're literally not giving you a prescription. We don't know what you should do. We know different approaches. We know what's worked for us. And we're trying to give you the hard-earned wisdom of a life spent in occasional pain from moments like this one. So,
and clearly it happens everywhere. So
totally, exactly. Academia, business, nonprofits, government, to be continued. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for having me, Roy.